Why hello there, and welcome back to Let's Make Us a Character. So, as you may have heard, Dungeons & Dragons, and let's be honest here, tabletop role-playing games as a thing in general, turned 50 this year. That's right, 50 years since the release of the first edition of Dungeons & Dragons, which of course is not first edition, but Dungeons & Dragons Rules for Fantastic Medieval Wargames, campaigns playable with paper and pencil and miniature figures by Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson. So I figured why not take this opportunity to travel back to 1974 to see where it all started and make us an original Dungeons & Dragons character. And yes, I realize that I already did make an original Dungeons & Dragons character, but I think it'll be okay to do another one, especially considering that the original video looks and sounds like this.
Why hello there, and welcome to Let's Make Us a Character, the series where we make role-playing game characters. And since this is the first episode, it only makes sense to start with the first modern role-playing game. So let's make us an original Dungeons & Dragons character.
So as I said, released in 1974, Dungeons & Dragons Rules for Fantastic Medieval Wargames campaigns playable with paper and pencil and miniature figures was a box set containing 3 rulebooks: Men and Magic, Monsters and Treasure, and The Underworld and Wilderness Adventures, as well as a set of reference sheets. And if you're wondering, hey, what about the dice? Well, as far as I can tell from my research, there weren't any in the box. Which wasn't actually that big of a deal because the game only actually required d6s, and optionally a d20, because if you are unaware, the original Dungeons & Dragons ran on the mechanics of the wargame Chainmail, also by Gary Gygax, but also provided a set of alternative d20 based combat mechanics which were the origins of the modern Dungeons & Dragons mechanics that Wizards of the Coast really want you to think that they own some kind of trademark on. Although admittedly I have no idea where you would get a d20 in 1974 if one didn't come in the box. From what I have read, polyhedral dice did exist as early as the 1960s, but were very difficult to acquire, especially outside of the UK or Japan. Although I do know that as of spring 1975, you could definitely get a set of a D20, 12, 8, 6, and 4 from TSR for $1.75. D10 not included because they did not exist yet. Anyway, the original edition was further supported by 5 supplements: Greyhawk, Blackmore, Eldritch Wizardry, Gods, Demigods, and Heroes, and Swords and Spells, which, in a weird full circle type thing, is basically a Dungeons & Dragons wargame. And when talking about original Dungeons & Dragons, it is also very important to point out that it is one of, if not the only edition of the game to not be afraid to include nudity in the books. So, when you really think about it, Wizards of the Coast's continued refusal to include female toplessness in modern D&D books is not just cowardly and misogynistic, but also deeply disrespectful to the proud history and origins of the game. So with that out of the way, let's set our dials to 1974, and let's make us another Dungeons & Dragons Rules for Fantastic Medieval Wargames campaigns playable with paper and pencil and miniature figures character. So the first thing we must do is roll 3d6 for each of our attributes, and we have 9 Strength, 14 Intelligence, 7 Wisdom, 11 Constitution, 6 Dexterity, and 16 Charisma. And since we do happen to have an Intelligence, Wisdom, or Charisma score of 15 or higher, we can also roll to check our Psionic ability. That's right, bitches, we're getting silly with the supplements. So we roll a percentile. Oh yeah, in regards to my previous statement about D10s not existing, the old-timey D20s were numbered 0 through 9 twice, making them functional as both D20s and D10s. Also, it's not like rolling a D10 with a D20 is in any way difficult, it is probably the easiest dice substitution to make. But yes, as I said, the familiar pentagonal trapezohedral D10 was not around until like 1980. Anyway, we roll the percentile, and on a result of 91 or higher, we possess some degree of psionic ability, and may be able to gain psychic powers. So, yeah, if you use these optional rules, every character just randomly has a 10% chance of being psionic. A thing that I am pretty sure this was the first game to do, but definitely not the last, and is one of those silly old school ttrpg things that I kind of like just because of how weird it is. So we roll our futuristic percentile dice, and we do have psionic ability. So we roll again to determine our psychic potential, which is 64 and will be discussed later. So moving on, we have our choice of 4 races: human, dwarf, elf, and hobbit, or halfling in the 6th and 7th printings because of the obvious legal issues stemming from the assumption that hobbit was public domain, which it still is not. And for our classes, fighting man, magic user, and cleric. Then from Greyhawk we add half-elves, thief as a base class, and paladin as a subclass of fighting man requiring a charisma score of 17. From the Strategic Review Volume 1 Number 2, later known as The Dragon, Ranger, another fighting man subclass requiring intelligence and wisdom scores of 12 and constitution of 15. From Blackmore, monks, which are a subclass of cleric requiring wisdom and dexterity of 15 and strength of 12, and assassin, a subclass of thief, possibly requiring 12 dexterity, strength, and intelligence. From the Strategic Review Volume 1 Number 4, illusionist, a subclass of magic user, possibly requiring intelligence and dexterity of 15. Like assassin, it is worded a little weirdly and involves a thing that I will get to later, so I will bring it up then. Then the Strategic Review Volume 2, Number 1, and the least official original Dungeons & Dragons class that was basically just ignored after this. The Bard, who is something of a weird mishmash, but definitely has the seeds of what we would see in the 1st through 4th edition bards later, and requires average strength and intelligence and above average charisma, which I guess according to Men in Magic means 9 and 13 respectively. And finally, from Eldritch Wizardry, Druid, another subclass of cleric requiring wisdom of 12 and charisma of 14. And the core book does also have anti-clerics, which are just evil clerics and obviously not intended as player characters. I just thought it was worth pointing out that an evil alternate version of a divine player class is a thing that dates all the way back to the very first book. Each class also has a prime requisite, which is basically their key attribute: strength for fighting men, intelligence for magic users, wisdom for clerics, and dexterity for thieves. And that is why the attributes are in such a weird order. Strength, intelligence, and wisdom are the first 3 because they are the prime requisites for the original 3 classes, which are presumably the same for all of the subclasses, with the exception of illusionist and assassin, maybe, which, as I said, I will get to later, and of course the anti-cleric, whose prime requisite is presumably evil wisdom. So let's go with human, because they are the only ones who can use psionic abilities and also have no class restrictions. And looking at our stats, we do not qualify for any of the fancy classes except for Bard, and I know this is very out of character, but even though we do have stats that qualify, I am not going to make a Bard, because their lack of inclusion in Eldritch Wizardry would be an issue later. And our strength, wisdom, and dexterity all kinda suck, so let's go with magic user. And because we also have very high charisma, why don't we make some kind of beautiful witch? Also, as I've mentioned before, just in general, I really love magic user as a class name. It is so neutral on the idea of magic. You're not a wizard in your tower or a sinister sorcerer. No, you're just a magic user. You just use magic. It's a thing you do. So let's head on over to our character sheet and pull up the bonuses and penalties to advancement due to abilities table. And I should probably address this note here. Average scores are 9 to 12. Units so indicated above may be used to increase prime requisite total insofar as it does not bring that category below average, i.e. below a score of 9. So, what does that mean? Well, let's bring up the descriptions of the prime requisites and see what they have to say about it. Strength is the prime requisite for fighters. Clerics can use strength on a 3-for-1 basis in their prime requisite area, wisdom for purposes of gaining experience only. Strength will also aid in opening traps and so on. Intelligence is the prime requisite for magical types. Both fighters and clerics can use it in their prime requisite areas, strength and wisdom respectively, on a 2-for-1 basis. Intelligence will also affect referees' decision as to whether or not certain action would be taken. Because you know how these old school games just love giving preference to character ability over player skill. And it allows additional languages to be spoken. And wisdom is the prime requisite for clerics. It may be used on a 3-for-1 basis by fighters and on a 2-for-1 basis by magic users in their respective prime requisite areas. Wisdom rating will act much as does that for intelligence. So back to that note, units so indicated above may be used to increase prime requisite total insofar as this does not bring that category below average. Does that mean that if it wasn't 7, I would be able to trade 2 points of wisdom for 1 point of intelligence? I honestly don't know, so I guess maybe? And I should probably point out that, yeah, the entire thing is basically written like that. Anyway, back to our stats. As a magical type, our prime requisite is Intelligence, which at 14 gives us a plus 5% bonus to earned experience. And now that we know what a prime requisite is and what it does, kinda, I can discuss the weirdness with assassins and illusionists. According to Blackmore, the prime requisites of the assassin are Dexterity, minimum of 12 or better, and Strength, minimum of 12 or better, and Intelligence, minimum of 12 or better. But prime requisites do not function as prerequisites. The main classes do not have prime requisite minimums, and in fact, the rules cover you having a prime requisite of 6 or lower. But now let's look at Illusionist, which says, their prime requisite is dual in that they must have both a good intelligence and a dexterity of not less than 15. And just for comparison, let's look at the requirements for the Monk, which are in the same book as Assassins. Characters with a Wisdom score of not less than 15, who also have a Strength score of not less than 12 and a Dexterity score of not less than 15, may elect to become monks. They are very clear. Those are the minimum attributes required to be a monk, and there is no mention of prime requisites. And then Rangers are actually the clearest of all, stating that Strength is their prime requisite, but they must also have both Intelligence and Wisdom scores of at least 12 each and a Constitution of at least 15. So as you can see, the Assassin and Illusionist are a little bit troublesome in that they are the only classes with multiple prime requisites and listed prime requisite minimums. So there are of course lots of questions here. Did they randomly decide that prime requisite minimums were a thing? Did they forget what a prime requisite was? Should we treat these as prerequisites or as prime requisites, with the minimums just being alternatives to the listed values for experience bonuses in the table? And if we assume that these prime requisites are prerequisites, are they also prime requisites? If you need 12 dexterity, 12 strength, and 12 intelligence to be an assassin, do you also need 13 dexterity, 13 strength, and 13 intelligence to get a plus 5% XP bonus, or just dexterity like a thief does? Once again, I do not know, but if I had to make a ruling on it, I would say that they are prerequisites, not prime requisites, and an assassin only needs high dex for an XP bonus. But back on topic, Intelligence also determines our starting languages, so all characters speak Common and a divisional language associated with their alignment. Oh, yeah, I guess that means we need an alignment, and let's go with Neutral. And then we also get one additional creature language for each point of intelligence above 10, so 4. our constitution of 11 is not high enough to get a bonus to hit points or to withstand adversity, but does provide a 60 to 90% chance of survival. And our dexterity of 6 imparts a -1 penalty to missile attacks. And just because I don't know where else to put it, our charisma of 16 sets our max hirelings at 6 with a +2 loyalty base. Then let's pull up the statistics regarding classes for magic users, noting that at first level our title is medium, and we have 1 level 1 spell per day, which isn't very much, but at least we don't also start with the slowest progression. Oh yeah, we do. But then we promptly ignore everything else and instead pull up Greyhawk and the alternative hit dice and hit point accumulation rules, which shows that as a magic user, we get 1 4-sided die hit points per level up to 11 and then 1 per level after that. So let's roll and 4. Take that, statistical averages. And back to our ability scores, Strength can modify attacks and damage, although those bonuses are only for fighting men, while penalties apply to all characters, as well as an adjustment to carrying capacity, and with a strength of 9, no modifiers to any of those, but we do have a 2 in 6 chance of opening doors. Intelligence determines our maximum spell level, which with an intelligence of 14 is 7. Our chance to know any given spell, which is 65%, and our minimum and maximum spells knowable per level, which are 5 and 8 respectively. Our constitution still gives no hit point adjustment, but also now a 75% probability of resurrection survival and an 80% chance of surviving spells such as polymorph, stone, etc. And that is it for Greyhawk, so back to the core rules. We will obviously be using the alternate combat rules. Maybe someday I will cover chainmail, but that day is not today. So let's pull up the saving throw matrix, and as a level 1 through 5 magic user, our saves versus death, ray, or poison is 13, wands 14, stone 13, dragon breath 16, and stabs and spells 15. Not sure exactly how that works with our 80% chance to survive spells. And those are the numbers we need to roll equal to or greater on our 20-sided die to save against that specific thing. And then we bring up Attack Matrix 1, which is a spread of 2 hit numbers for specific armor classes. And those are the same for all starting characters, and then for a magic user they go up at every 5 levels gained. And those are of course the number that we need to roll to hit a target with that specific armor class. And if you are not familiar with pre-3rd edition Dungeons & Dragons, armor classes go down as defensive ability goes up for no particular reason. But moving on to equipment, we start with 3d6 times 10, so 100 gold, and since magic users may arm themselves with daggers only, I guess we'll get a dagger. And as for armor, it is stated that magic users cannot use magic armor, but doesn't say anything about non-magic armor. However, I am just going to assume that the intent is that they cannot. So just some adventuring essentials, all of which has a weight of 100 coins, plus our remaining 64 coins for 164 coin weight total. Because all weights in this game are given in the most universally understandable unit, equivalent weight in gold coins. And then all of that is well within our 750 coin carrying capacity, giving us a speed of 12 inches. I think. This is pretty much the entirety of the encumbrance and movement rules. And since we have no armor, our unarmored class is 9. Then back to Greyhawk, and using a dagger gives us a +2 bonus to attacks versus targets with an AC of 9, +1 versus 8, no adjustment against 6 or 7, -1 versus 5 and 4, and -3 versus 3 and 2. And I'm just going to apply those to the 2 hit numbers for convenience. And a dagger deals 1 to 4 points of damage against man-sized opponents, and 1 to 3 damage against larger. And this is in Greyhawk because in the base rules, all weapons dealt 1d6 damage. So at first level, this character would actually have been fairly close to the combat potential of a sword-wielding fighting man. But now onto spells, which I may or may not have been intentionally putting off. As mentioned, we have one level 1 spell per day, a 65% chance to know any given spell, and a minimum 5 and maximum 8 spells known per level. So, what does all that mean? Perfectly valid question. If there is one major issue in this game, it is the sheer number of things that are just not explained, which I will say is still a major issue with tabletop role-playing games 50 years later. So the core rules just tell us that we can use one level 1 spell per day and maybe have a spell book. And they definitely had ideas about how many spells you were supposed to know and how starting spells were determined, but just never got around to writing them down. And then in Greyhawk, they added all these new rules, once again without bothering to write down the details of how to use those numbers because it was obvious to them because they created the rules. So there is a bit of a problem where they didn't really seem to give much thought to the possibility of someone who didn't already know how to play the game needing to read the rules to learn how to play. So I don't know, whatever, let's just pull up the expanded magic user spell list from Greyhawk and roll down the list against our chance of knowing spells until we have 5, which is our minimum spells per level. And there we go, we know Charm Person, Light, Magic Missile, Read Languages, and Read Magic, and then I guess can learn up to 3 more spells during our adventures to our maximum of 8. And that's probably it for spells, so on to the final step, for which we must return to Eldritch Wizardry and roll to see if we can gain a Psionic type ability, which is a 10% chance per level, modified by our Psionic potential, which at 64 is no adjustment. So we roll and fail. And this character is done. Probably, maybe. Listen, I am working off of poorly explained content scattered throughout several different books that are half supplement, half errata, and varying degrees of optional, so I am not 100% on some of this, but let's just say that anything I missed or got wrong are things that I, as the Dungeon Master, have chosen not to use or to interpret incorrectly, which I believe by OSR law grants me immunity to criticism. But now that we've made this character, what can they do? Well, as mentioned, we have a 2 in 6 chance of opening doors, and that's about it. Yeah, we could improvise some mechanics for basic attribute tests based on what is provided, but even if we did that, we then run into an issue that skills are a thief class feature. And if we go off of the door rules and say that a character with dexterity of 6 has a 1 in 6 chance of hiding in shadows, that outclasses a level 2 thief's ability to do the same. And if we somehow just intuited a d20 roll under system, that goes up to outclassing a level 4 thief. So if you want to, you can add your own mechanics, but in doing so, you need to make sure that you are not negating a large part of the functionality of the thief. And this is pre-3rd edition, so sneak attack / backstab is not the thief's core ability. But hey, speaking of the alternative combat system, let's talk about the alternative combat system, and say that we have encountered a basic goblin. Which means it is now time to engage in a combat round, in which the goblin desires to stab us with its pointy stick, and we intend to use our 1 prepared spell per day, Magic Missile. And since we are casting a spell, we need to pull up Eldritch Wizardry and the Missile Fire or Spell Casting table, which divides the combat round into a pre-movement segment, 6 movement segments, and a post-movement segment, so 8 total phases. Then we need to determine our adjusted dexterity, which is equal to our dexterity plus or minus a whole bunch of modifiers, none of which apply to us right now, so our adjusted dexterity of 6 puts us in the 2nd movement segment. So pre-movement segment, and then Oh, yeah, we do need to establish which direction the characters are facing, so there's that. Then movement segment 1, and the goblin moves, and with a speed of 6, the goblin can move 1 inch per movement segment, so it moves 1 inch closer. Then segment 2, and it moves another inch closer, but also we can now fire off our magic missile, which strikes automatically for 2 to 7 damage, so 3. Then segments 3 and 4, and now the goblin is within melee range, so it attacks. Maybe, or maybe it waits until after the movement phases. I don't know, and I don't really care. Let's just have it attack so we can get on to the next wacky thing. That next wacky thing being the hit location rules from Blackmore. So first, we have hit point allocation values for our various body parts, and that tells us which percentage of our hit points are in each specified body segment. So with 4 hit points and assuming a minimum of 1, we have 1 hit point in the head, 3 in the chest, 2 in the abdomen, and 1 in each arm and leg. And of course, no tail or wings. Yeah, that's right, this kind of thing has been here since almost the beginning. And then if we lose all of the hit points in our chest, head, or take cumulative damage equal to our hit point total, we die, with loss of all points in a limb being crippling or loss of said limb, and losing all points in the abdomen, well, I'll get to that in a bit. And because I'm sure you're wondering, yes, there are specific hit location and damage allocation rules for different creature types. So now that we have that sorted out, we can pull up the Attack Matrix 2, and as a monster with 1 hit die attacking a target with an AC of 9, the goblin needs to roll a 10 or higher to hit, which it does. So let's pull up the humanoid hit location table, and nah, I'm just kidding. We're not getting off that easy. First, we have to pull up the weapon/height adjustment matrix. And let's just say that our character is 6 feet tall and the goblin is 3 feet tall, which is a result of 40. And since the result is on the right side of the matrix, that means that the goblin cannot roll 40 or lower on the hit location table. It is just too short to do so. Although, now that I think about it, a pointy stick is probably at least a foot long. And according to the weapon length's effects on combat rules, you can add the length of your weapon to height when calculating a result on the weapon/height adjustment matrix. So that bumps the goblin up to an effective height of 4 feet, which is a result of N, meaning no adjustment. That's right, all of that was for nothing. So the goblin rolls, and 43 is a hit to the chest. Also, remember when I said that I would explain the effects of abdomen damage later? Well, you just can't roll abdomen damage on the humanoid hit location table. And remember, as I said, the damage allocation and hit location tables are creature type specific. So it's not like there's another situation in which the abdomen hit points can be targeted. And a goblin deals 1 to 4 damage, so 2 damage to our chest. Then round 2, and since that was our 1 spell per day and we can be armed with a dagger only, we will attack with our dagger. But wait, who goes first? Well, Men in Magic kinda suggests the dexterity affects who goes first, but maybe that only relates to spells and missile attacks like we covered earlier, and also monsters just don't have dexterity scores, so whatever, let's just roll. Okay, we go first. And a goblin has an armor class of 6, so based on our 2 hit numbers, we must roll a 13 or higher to hit, which we do. Although that does unfortunately mean more weapon/height adjustment matrix. So this time the attacker is 6 feet and the target 3, which is another result of 40, but this time it's on the left side of the table, which means that we can only roll 40 or below. And if you are looking at these numbers and going, hey, wait a minute, yes, at 1 foot taller than the target, you have a guaranteed headshot, 10 or lower. Then at 2 or 3 feet taller, you can hit the head or chest, and at 4 feet taller, anywhere other than legs. And abdomen, of course, because you can never hit the abdomen on a humanoid target. which logically seems, kinda backwards, but who am I to argue with Dave Arneson? So let's roll a d40 on the humanoid hit location table, and 12 is head for 3 dagger damage, which exceeds the goblin's head and total hit points, making it double dead. And for defeating the goblin, we get 2,500 experience points. It was a very expensive goblin, which just coincidentally happens to be enough to bring us up to level 2. I mean, wow, what are the odds? So we get an additional 1d4 hit points, our attacks and saves do not go up until level 6, and now we have a minimum known spells of 10 and maximum of 16. So once again, I don't know, do we just roll on the spells again until we have 10? Sure, why not? Let's just do that, and there, now we know every level 1 spell except shield. We also get one more level 1 spell per day, and most importantly, our title changes to Seer. And once again, we check to see if we can get a psionic ability, but at level 2 our chance is 20% because it's 10% per level, and wow, look at that, a success. Almost as if this is just an example and the dice roll whatever numbers I need them to explain things. So let's bring up Eldritch Wizardry. And a big thing here is that we do need to decide to take a psionic power, because every class that can take them loses something for doing so. Fighters lose 1 follower per power gained and 1 point of strength per 4 powers, and also gain their powers through yoga, which just amuses me that in 1976 yoga was so uncommon that you could present it as something that Westerners would see as mystical and mysterious. Magic users lose 1 spell level of spells per day per number of powers, so 1 level 1 spell for our first power, and then 1 level 2 spell or 2 level 1 spells for the second, and so on. Clerics lose spells as a magic user, but also count themselves as 1 level lower for each power gained for the purposes of turn undead, and thieves are subject to basically the same advantages as those gained by fighting men, but also lose 1 point of dexterity per 4 powers gained. Then monks and druids are specifically prohibited from becoming psychics, which is kind of funny because 34 years later, monks would actually get classified as a psionic class in 4th edition. And then of course, as alluded to earlier, the psionic potential of bards is not even mentioned. So a wee bit uneven in terms of cost, but once again this is just an example, making the loss of one of our 2 spell slots an acceptable sacrifice. So as a magic user, we have 10 basic and 8 advanced psionic abilities available to us, and because it does specifically state magic users including illusionists, I should mention that it does also specifically state that paladins, rangers, and assassins are treated as fighting men and thieves respectively. They just very much did not want druids and monks to be able to have psychic powers for some reason. And since we cannot have more advanced abilities than basic, we'll just roll for a basic ability. And reduction, which allows us to reduce our height by 1 foot per level that we have possessed the ability. So 1 foot now, then 2 at level 3, and so on, which isn't incredibly useful at the moment, but also doesn't cost any psionic strength points, which is another thing I am going to have to explain. But first, upon receiving our first psionic ability, we also gain our first psionic attack mode, Psionic Blast, with additional attack modes gained at every 4 psionic abilities and defense modes at every 3. So yeah, now about those psionic attack points. Our psionic attack strength is equal to our psionic potential, plus our number of psionic abilities times 2, plus attack and defense modes times 5. So 64 plus 1 times 2 plus 1 times 5 is 71. But what do all these numbers mean and what do they do? Well, for example, let's say that we have encountered some kind of, mind goblin, and decide to mind battle. Since we are both using psionic attacks at the same time, we roll percentile dice and add our psionic attack strength to see who goes first, which is our beautiful witch. Yeah, there are initiative rules for this one specific thing. And in Psionic Combat, the attacker selects a psionic attack mode and the defender a defense mode. So we will use Psionic Blast, because that's all we have, and the goblin will use Mind Blank, both paying the respective psionic strength point costs, which then of course lowers our effective psionic attack strength by 50% of the points expended. And if you are thinking, wait, does that mean that you can spend more points than you have? Once again, perfectly valid question. Then we need to determine our total psionic strength, which is equal to twice our psionic attack strength, or psionic attack and defense strengths added together. This being the only time a psionic defense strength is ever mentioned. So let's just assume that it is twice our psionic attack strength, so 61 times 2 is 122. Then we look that up on the full psionic combat damage scored matrix, and when executing a mental blast against a target using Mind Blank, we deal 30 damage, which is applied to the target's psychic attack strength. Then the Mind Goblin goes and also uses Psionic Blast. However, as we have no psionic defense modes to use, the attack is made using the special psionic attack matrix. So we reference the Goblin's psionic attack strength versus our psionic potential, and we take 40 psychic damage. And just in case you are wondering how we regain all of those spent and lost psionic attack points, by talking with your pals, reading a nice book by the fire, or taking a nap. And I believe that just about covers all of the weird supplementary rules for original Dungeons & Dragons. Except for the underwater movement and combat rules from Blackmoor, but I can't fit everything into the video without it getting boring. So that was another original Dungeons & Dragons character, just a wee bit more thorough than the last one. And overall, it is kind of a janky mess. Like, let's be honest here, it's not like there was any kind of guideline for what a role-playing game was when they wrote this thing. They just kind of made a thing, and then after the thing was released, thought of a bunch of new ideas they wanted to add to the thing, and then they did. The supplements are really just a lot of them throwing whatever random ideas they had at the customers. And as you've seen in the video, it's a bit of a mixed bag. And I will actually be getting a bit deeper into the books themselves and their weird collection of content in a future video, so keep an eye out for that, or just watch it if it's already out. And if you would like to try out Dungeons & Dragons Rules for Fantastic Medieval Wargames campaigns playable with paper and pencil and miniature figures for yourself, I wouldn't recommend it, honestly. Like, trying to read these rules is not fun or easy, and for any reason other than historical interest, is really just not worth the effort. As mentioned earlier, the rulebooks read much more like reference books intended for someone who already knows how to play the game than they do like rulebooks to teach you how to play. So if you do want to experience the original Dungeons & Dragons game, this is a situation where I would actually recommend retro clones, something like Swords and Wizardry, which just happens to be the only one I'm familiar with, which does make the game significantly more understandable and playable. And best of all, none of the money goes to Wizards of the Coast. Although admittedly they do exclude some of the more insane content like the psionics and weird 8-segment combat system and specific hit point allocations and hit location tables for fish and snakes with height and weapon length based adjustments. Or maybe they do. My version's from like 2010, I don't know what they've added since then. Anyway, hopefully you have enjoyed this trip into the origins of Dungeons and/or Dragons, and aren't too upset that I put off the next Gamma World video to do it. Although, honestly, I can't imagine that anyone is that excited to learn about Alternity. Not saying Alternity isn't interesting, just that there's probably a lot of people right now who have no idea what I'm talking about or how it relates to both Gamma World and the weird transitional period from TSR to Wizards of the Coast. And thank you for watching. If you want more of my special brand of wit and insight, you can follow me on Blue Sky, Twitter, even Tumblr. Especially Tumblr. There are links in the description. And extra special thanks to my Fight and Flail Snails, Broken Unicorn, D-Stex, Hasterfan, Randy Mulholland, Renee D, Sean Betts, Stephen Kramer, Toshirokuro, and Trey Adams. If you'd like to be cool like them, check out my Patreon. Also, channel memberships are now a thing, so you can check those out too. But if you don't want to do that, that's cool too. You can still hit all the lovely buttons, like, subscribe, these other videos that the dark, unseen hand of the YouTube algorithm has lovingly selected for you, which I am sure are lovely videos that you will also enjoy. And I will see you next time.